Look at this, even those postcard-perfect Maldives near the equator were already seeing an average of minus 42 degrees. The whole island was covered in ice and snow. Even the ocean was freezing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was unbelievable. According to expert measurements, the ice layer has already reached a depth of 55 centimeters. Similar scenes were happening in other equatorial countries assumed to be warm. Watching in front of his massive entertainment system, Hanfeng mocked the news stories. In reality, the situation in the outside world was many times worse than what the media reflected. He was enjoying his daily wine when a sudden noise from outside scared him to death. Hanfeng rushed to the window and pulled open the curtains. He could see a building engulfed in flames from a distance. That was the 7th explosion in the last few days. Hanfeng was completely clueless as to what the reason was. But one thing was certain, this was not a good sign. The number of military helicopters flying over the city was also steadily increasing. If he didn't know anything, the other poor survivors were completely clueless. The situation outside was causing panic among residents. They had all basically set up camp in the parking lot. Their goal was to trade their goods and food stocks. Since human greed knows no bounds, many opportunists had emerged, trying to take advantage of others. And this, naturally, caused a lot of conflict and fighting. And at the center of all this was Mr. Zhang, still playing the role of that reliable leader. He played the philanthropist, providing free resources to the poor. Today was a special day because Hanfeng decided to go down to the parking lot with the other survivors. He'd only left his warm home a few minutes ago, but the cold was already chilling him to the bone. Every time he left the comfort of his home, he deeply regretted the decision. The main reason he went down was to gather some useful information. If it weren't for that, he'd never show his face to these people again. Before he got a chance to reset his life, he remembered a riot that tore through the neighborhood. If his memory served him right, the trail led to the characters down here in this basement. Instead of blatantly scamming people, they still seemed to stand behind their promises of resource distribution. To truly understand what was going on, Hanfeng decided to play detective within this complex and chaotic community. Judging by the long lines at the assembly area, the number of families suffering from scarcity was relatively high. The man at the front of the line kept complaining about how little food he was given, even though he had donated boxes and boxes of supplies back then. While Mr. Jank insisted that everyone gets an equal share, that is, 1 can 1 sausage, the man wanted his donated goods back. But since the disaster was still ongoing, the committee was naturally like, no way. Mr. Jank asked the man to look at the big picture and promised to pay him back many times over once things settled down. But with tomorrow being so uncertain, the promise of money wasn't worth more than toilet paper right now. Finally, the other people in line started raising their voices against the complaining man. "Shut your mouth, you shameless man, get lost," they shouted as they lynched him. It didn't take long for a mob to form, hating this shameless man who just wanted a few more supplies for his family. They were all under the influence of the interim committee. Hanfeng knew for a fact that those in power wouldn't let go of the resources now. But playing the moral police against those who helped the most at the start of the crisis was just as shameless. Speaking of being shameless, that man, that legend, that myth, took the stage again in the parking lot. It was none other than Homeless Joe, Brother Lee. He looked much worse than he did a few days ago. He was collapsed, sickly, and nothing but skin and bones. It had been a while since the two brothers last saw each other. Although Lee claimed things weren't that bad, it was clear as day he was a total mess. If you asked her, she's shaking from excitement and weakness, not just the cold. It didn't look too bad at all. Brother Lee finally admitted he's been going through hard times. With no food left, he just kept drinking water to curb his hunger. With the donation campaign in full swing, he gave everything he had to the committee. As a result, their stock ran out before the blizzard's promised end date. On top of that, the rations the committee handed out like pocket change weren't enough. If Brother Lee knew the weather would get this bad, he would have set aside more goods for himself. Noticing a way to fix Lee's miserable situation, Hanfeng pulled the mobster-like man aside and whispered a tip in his ear. Lee stepped back in surprise. Little Hanfeng offered him 4 packs of instant noodles and 2 sausages for a simple task. Hanfeng emphasized that this will lead to a serious reduction in their own stock. Our wannabe mobster thought his little brother was just making up excuses to bring him food. Her eyes filled with tears, and she swore she'd never forget your kindness as long as she lived. Brother Lee sincerely caught Hanfeng, and he guaranteed that this minor matter would be handled quietly. As for the food, he could stop by Hanfeng's later and pick it up. But first Brother Lee needed to get some food in his stomach, so he joined the supply line. As for Hanfeng, he was quite pleased with this perfect deal he had orchestrated. For just a few packs of noodles and sausages, he wouldn't have to come to this dump himself to gather intel in the future. He felt a little sorry for Lee, but sticking his nose into other people's business wasn't nearly as important as lounging on the couch, eating delicious food, and playing games. Hanfeng's parking adventure would have ended perfectly if he hadn't been spotted by another familiar face. Right after hearing his name, the only thing he saw was a palm rushing toward his face. Lee Hyona's greeting today was a heavy slap that landed right on Hanfeng's cheek. Hanfeng, not expecting a beating at this hour, didn't know how to react to such an absurd scenario. Hyona, eyes burning with rage, told Hanfeng she was in utter disappointment. That broke slut kept screaming at him just because he didn't reply to her texts begging for food. He raised his voice on purpose so everyone in the parking lot could hear. Hanfeng was completely frozen. He stood there, trying to figure out what was going on. That which he's dealing with slapped him right in the face in front of everyone. He hadn't even settled the scores from his previous life. And now, she's invading his space and slapping him for no reason. This was just too much. As his anger flared alarmingly, he realized Lee Hyona still saw him as that same old, easily bullied, pathetic weakling. He fell silent for a moment, as he scolded her for not answering. Hyona treated him as if he were deaf and mute, demanding that he answer her questions. Hanfeng took a deep breath, his exhale turning to mist in the cold air. Then he immediately stepped into another role. He sincerely apologized to Hyonadin, explaining that their supplies had been stolen. He had just put the food delivery by the door and stepped inside for a second to grab his keys, but when he returned, the boxes were gone. Hanfeng claimed he tried looking for the culprit but found no clues. At that moment, the woman looked like a drug addict writhing for her next dose. He asked her if she still had some supplies left. He said he had little left, and if he managed on one meal a day, it would only last him a few days. Hyona's unstable face lit up with a shy smile, hearing that there was still some food left. She was back to playing the sweet girl, and the transition was seamless. But when she asked Hanfeng to share half his food and eat only once every 2 days to survive this disaster together, she sounded completely out of her mind. Hanfeng could hardly stand how shameless this woman was. It's terrifying how she can say such selfish things without even blinking. Hanfeng smiled, letting the girl think that way, and gladly went along with the plan. He loved playing the role of a reliable man of his word. And he seemed naive enough to split his rations equally with some girl. Even if the girl wants the food right now, our guy scheduled the delivery for tonight. The excuse was that they needed to pack up. And the girl playfully says, "I'm waiting for your message tonight then." It got stuck. Turning back first, Hyona gave her well wishes, saying, "Be careful, there's a virus going around, don't get sick." Hanfeng said his goodbyes, but his devious mind had already hatched a sinister plan. By around 8 p.m., Lee Hyona was already pestering Hanfeng for food. His impatience grew so much that he got up and went to the lobby near the man's room. By 9:30, he was waiting alone in the corridors, shivering from the cold and looking miserable. Hanfeng was busy with his favorite hobby, giving Hyona a taste of it, then totally ghosting her by ignoring all her messages and calls. The elevator broke down from the cold because it hadn't been serviced in weeks. So, even if she wanted to cause trouble, she had to use the stairs to get up to Hanfeng's apartment. With no other choice left, Lee Hyona swallowed her pride and headed toward those eerie stairs. He was already exhausted halfway through, shivering uncontrollably from the cold. It was absolute hell. If it weren't for the supplies, he'd never endure this misery. Exhaustion set in as he hadn't eaten for several days. With every step up the stairs, he spent the last of his strength. But give credit where credit is due, hardly anyone would climb over 16 floors just to steal someone else's food. Coincidentally, The emergency lights on the upper floors had also burst. This made the climb feel darker and more eerie. Startled by strange noises, Lee Hyona called out anxiously, "Who's there?" In answer to his question, a black plastic bag drifting down from the upper floors began moving to land right on his lovely head. Frozen in shock, Hyona stood rooted to the spot and waited for the black bag to hit. As soon as the bag popped with a loud bang, emergency lights flashed on and the stairwell filled with a white cloud of dust. She's always cheerful and smiling. Lee Hyona's head and face were completely covered in flour. Hanfeng stood before him. Supposedly he fell asleep, then as soon as he saw the messages, he grabbed the supplies and ran downstairs. When the lights went out, he accidentally dropped the flour sack, and it turned into this mess. Hyona felt nauseous as she brushed the flour and plastic bits off her hair and jacket. Hints of his true, filthy personality were leaking from beneath his mask. Hanfeng was quite pleased with this view. He had prepared this prank specially for her, and he wasn't finished yet. He picked up another plastic bag and told that which he had packed the rest of the supplies for her. When he checked, he noticed that most of the food and products were already moldy. It looked more like trash than food. Hanfeng, playing dumb, scratched his neck and grumbled about how hard he worked to keep these leftovers in stock. It even had rotten meat inside. Then he skillfully feigned success as he snatched the plastic bag. He said she should give it back if she didn't like it. Fearing another day of hunger, the witch hurriedly pulled back the bag and claimed what she wanted. Hanfeng sized him up from head to toe. He gave a mocking laugh. Before him stood the so-called goddess he had once chased with all his might. But right now, he looked like a homeless junkie left out on a winter night. He was rummaging through the trash bag, trying to find something to eat inside that moldy pile. He even greedily grabbed the last bag of flour from Hanfeng's hands. Lee Hyona was celebrating even half a bag of flour, not caring that she was covered in that white powder just moments ago. Then he didn't even say thank you or goodbye, just walked off. But she was satisfied because Hanfeng literally fed her his trash. It'll be enough to upset that witch's stomach for a few days. It's impossible to take a shower in this weather, so he'll have to walk around with all that flour. And it will stay stuck to its body for a while. As Hanfeng happily headed home, a strange feeling began to stir within him. He acted like he didn't notice, but something was moving in the back. Keeping his cool, Hanfeng walked naturally toward his apartment. He came up the stairs and carried on as if everything was normal. A few seconds later, a shadow-like figure followed. Judging by the snow boots, it was definitely a human. Turning the element of surprise to his advantage, Hanfeng hid behind the door and lunged at the unknown figure following him. He made sure to grab the mysterious figure firmly and toss them to the ground. He was about to punch that creep watching her when something made Hanfeng pause. As his anger cooled, his pursuer turned out to be a girl with messy hair, sleepy eyes, and glasses as thick as bottle bottoms. What's going on here? Only one reason came to Hanfeng's mind for her being here this late. He definitely must have been watching her. And our hero wanted to know his intentions. But all he got in return was silence, and a blank stare from behind the glasses. It was clear the girl wasn't very talkative. Not a single word was spoken, and surprised by this attitude, Hanfeng decided to use harsher methods to make him talk. He threatened to strip off her coat right then and there in this cold if she didn't talk. Even this wasn't enough to get the girl to talk. Hanfeng got tired of dealing with him and decided to let him go this time. But next time, if he spies on her again, he shouldn't expect such a favor. Now it would be better if he stopped these silence games and went home before getting cold. Just as our hero was about to leave, he suddenly felt someone grab his arm. This quiet girl didn't look like she'd let him go that easily. Even though Hanfeng didn't understand what she wanted, she just stared at him and kept silent. Hanfeng told him to stop staring at her. She even threatened to leave him there if he didn't say what he wanted. But instead of answering, the girl pointed somewhere and pulled our hero along. Even an airhead like Hanfeng understood that he was being shown something. They came to the girl's room. It was surprisingly warm and bright inside. Our hero is officially speechless. Looking around, he noticed piles of supply boxes. Of course, some were empty and it was full of trash. But it was incredible that this girl still had so many supplies, even weeks after the world ended. Had she also prepared in advance? Hanfeng asked him directly if he knew beforehand. Did he know the glacial apocalypse was about to begin? And surprisingly, the girl finally spoke. Mind you, he said some rather strange things. Turns out he did the math himself, and found results predicting an upcoming ice age. It turns out that weirdo from the site group, the one who kept posting about the ice age disaster before it all started, was actually this girl. Hanfeng. Of course he didn't understand what you were talking about. It was hard for a bonehead like him to grasp that by doing research and calculations, the future could sometimes be known without needing to reincarnate, or return to the past. But Hanfeng was aware of this. The girl probably didn't bring him here to talk about her research. And he was right. The girl clearly showed the real reason. He had a lot of screens in his room filled with security camera footage. And our hero was in all of them. In the first shot, he was picking his nose while carrying a stack of boxes in the elevator. The second time, the couriers were carrying a dozen gas cans into their room. The third time, Brotherly brought him a gun bag and so on. It seems Han Feng's initial hunch about the girl was correct. The girl was actually watching him, and she had been for a long time. Now more relaxed than ever, she didn't hesitate for a second to change right in front of our hero. The room was too warm to wear thick winter clothes. Hanfeng managed to screw up and misunderstand the situation. He asked the girl why she started undressing out of the blue. The girl simply replied that it was hot in here. But of course, ours meant something else. Why was she doing this in front of him? He ordered him to stop immediately, and put his pants back on. Eventually, no matter how much he resisted, he had to take off his coat after a while. This girl had dangerous information, and she couldn't just walk away without resolving this matter. So to summarize what they understood, Hanfeng realized the reason why she was spying on him. He drew attention because he started stockpiling supplies before it even snowed. Luckily, this tracking wasn't to blackmail our hero or gather info. The goal was to see if Hanfeng is smart and talented enough to cooperate. Now, all that was left was to figure out what he meant by cooperation. It was hard for the girl to speak, so she decided it would be better to show him instead. Of course, causing our hero to misunderstand everything in his own way. Hanfeng couldn't even imagine what the girl would do. Who knows what was going through your mind while doing those weird moves? But the girl didn't pull out what you think from behind the bed. She pulled out a generator. She just wanted Hanfeng to teach her how to use the generator. She was a computer geek and a bookworm, but failed when it came to practical survival skills. After a while, the generator started humming along perfectly. Let's ignore the fact that running a generator in an enclosed room is a terrible idea for now. Let's assume this generator runs on hydrogen and is quite quiet. Hanfeng hoped that was all the girl wanted. But where is it? Her blue eyes were asking for help again. This time she was struggling with the kettle. Our hero took care of it in a flash. With the generator, he would have hot water 24/7 now. But still, Hanfeng warned the girl to use water sparingly and not forget to turn off the faucet. Right after that, the girl asked for help with the fridge. The inside of the closet had turned into an unimaginable mess. And our hero had to teach her that raw meat belongs in the freezer, not the fridge. Otherwise, the meat would spoil in the blink of an eye. He also had to keep everything clean, or he'd soon fall ill and be bedridden. And Hanfeng wasn't going to do all this for him. The girl must handle everything on her own. Hanfeng couldn't figure out how the girl had survived all this time without knowing such basic things. He even had to personally show her how to connect and change the gas cylinders on the stove. The girl had to engrave all security measures in her mind and repeat everything Hanfeng did without any mistakes. Things got even messier after that. Hanfeng also had to teach her how to cook over a fire and roast meat. When our hero's battery finally ran out, a delicious dinner was served. He advised the girl to eat her food while it's hot. As for him, he was still wondering how he ended up in this life. She spent her whole day babysitting a grown man. Her new friend's self-care skills were non-existent, but the girl didn't show the slightest hint of shame on her face. Dinner was absolutely delicious. Hanfeng noticed the disagreement and awkwardly brushed it off, joking to smooth things over. An incredible exhaustion remained from the day, and he could dream of nothing but his warm bed. Turns out he wasn't the only one exhausted by the end of the day. When he turned to the girl, he saw she'd already passed out. Apparently, the dining table felt quite comfortable as a bed for him. It was the first time Hanfeng had ever seen someone fall asleep while eating. Still, he relented and carried her in his arms to her bed. Who would have thought he'd spend the whole day teaching a kid? Snowfall intensified throughout the night, and the temperature dropped further. Hanfeng had just woken up when guests appeared at his door, seeking attention. It was that same girl again. He brought gifts to thank them for their help. Even our hero was surprised by the girl's generosity. He brought some pretty heavy stuff. But even after Hanfeng took the boxes inside, the girl kept standing at the door. It didn't look like he was going anywhere. I could tell by that look he was going to ask for another favor. He brought a generator and asked Hanfeng to give him another lesson. It felt like he didn't remember much from yesterday's lessons. So Hanfeng had to start everything all over again. After a few days with the girl, he realized she was a complete idiot when it came to survival. He also severely lacked common sense and that basic understanding of what's appropriate and what isn't. But he wouldn't give up, and every day, she dragged Hanfeng to his room to learn survival and life skills. After a while, he finally managed to cook something that could be considered edible. I mean, at least it looked like food. Hanfeng even considered such cooking skills as progress. In the old days, even dogs wouldn't want to eat something like this. But in this ice apocalypse, even people would line up for a meal like this. After all this time, Hanfeng finally decided to learn her name. Girl, introduce yourself as Zhao Xingan. Why the girl spoke so strangely and what her problem was remained a mystery to Hanfeng. But he wasn't about to leave her to her fate. Meanwhile, in the basement where supplies were being handed out to residents in need, things were anything but calm. Starving residents were fighting each other over the last few scraps of food they had left. Total chaos reigned, and people started taking things from each other by force. The fight was escalating as no one could prove who the supplies belonged to. The weak collapsed in despair. And the powerful were trying to grab even more. It looks like the peaceful days in this community were over. People were fighting for resources they thought they had a right to. They protected those tiny bits of loot they plundered with their lives. Any attempted theft would instantly turn into blind violence. These people were beating each other mercilessly with fists and kicks until their shoes were drenched in blood. While everyone accelerated the collapse of civilization, Bai Jiang remained calm in the eye of the storm. He turned the megaphone's volume all the way up and cut through the fight like a knife. While everyone covered their ears in pain, our guy was literally launching a real sonic attack. That was a total supervillain move. After that grating feedback sound, Bai Jiang finally called out to the other survivors. He asked if they'd had enough of the fight. He helped the badly beaten man to his feet and told how they risked death just for these few remaining resources. What they did was total nonsense, but the crowd was still furious. The one who proposed the donation system was Bai Jiang himself. And now they only got a single pack of noodles every few days. Even if they didn't die fighting, they were going to starve to death anyway. Bai Jiang pretended to listen to issues with resource distribution or complaints about undistributed supplies. Then he turned to his men and didn't break his composure. If they're fighting over such ridiculous reasons, maybe they deserve to starve to death. Bai Jiang raised the question of who caused this situation in the first place, and invited them to think it over carefully. The angry crowd was blaming him for it. He took a piece of bread and began his magic while reminding people of what was actually happening. That bread was originally sold for just a few dollars. Now, those with abundant resources could buy them for tens or even hundreds of dollars. The elite class exploited the unfortunate people to the last drop. It had come down to dividing a single piece of bread into 5 or 10 pieces to auction off. They were using the disaster to get rich. As for those crawling in the basement of the parking lot, they had long since run out of money and supplies. But here they were, fighting among themselves. In the old system, they used to kill each other. Yet the elites, with plenty of supplies, hoarded their treasures instead of donating to the public good. They were the ones hiking prices in bad faith. Yet it was the poor who starved and fought to the death here. Bai Jiang asked if this was fair. Noticing the crowd hanging on his every word, Bai Jiang called for everyone to stop what they were doing. And he asked them to unite to reclaim the resources belonging to all. Bo Gak and the angry citizens were already starting to make sense of what they just heard. They were certain they'd been treated unfairly. Why the hell do the rich snobs get to enjoy themselves while everyone else has to struggle with hunger and death, huh? Bai Jiang enjoyed watching the puzzle pieces fall into place on their own. Once those seeds of hatred were planted in their minds, the masses' insatiable rage turned toward the other residents, the ones upstairs. The survivors believed they were only taking back what was theirs. Watching the violence, chaos, and despair bubbling up, Bai Jiang smirked silently and deviously. In the midst of this escalating chaos, homeless Joe, also known as Brother Lee, could be seen. Out of all those people, he was the only one who didn't buy the BS in that speech. People were officially losing it, and a major crisis was about to break out. He had to inform Hanfeng as soon as possible. Hanfeng was sprawled out in his room, snoring away while pretending to be reading a book. He woke up with a start at the sound of his phone. Messages came in about the brewing trouble in the basement parking lot of Lee Abaddon. With Bai Jian constantly fueling the fire, people began planning to loot other supplies. They were going door to door, forcing the locks. These looters were armed and more than ready to do harm. Lee told Abi to hide with Han Feng and not to deal with these maniacs. Han Feng could only hope that the homeless Joe would be able to fend for himself out there. Han Feng never imagined things would reach this point. Though he bought 2 pistols for emergencies, the idea of using them against another human gave him the creeps. Besides, if the people organized such an operation and exposed his supplies, they'd definitely hunt him down like a rabid dog. They would eat him alive and leave nothing behind but his bones. That's why he had to be prepared for any scenario. For now, he pulled out a bundle of cables, got some tools and some fire extinguishers from the storage room. Using these materials, he tried to set up a trap by roughly attaching electric wires to the door handle for security reasons. After finishing that makeshift rig, Han Feng slowly laid the cable on the ground. But this little experiment was cut short by a sudden power outage. Looking from above, it was clear as day that the power went out in all the buildings in the area at the same time. Some tried calling management. Their electricity was cut off, but contact with those people had been lost long ago. Han Feng predicted this blackout would happen sooner or later due to the intensifying blizzard and the power grid overload from people trying to stay warm. Worse yet, the snow building up everywhere and those freezing, awful temperatures outside made repair work impossible. Considering all the factors, this power outage and signal loss could have been permanent this time. When people realized the power wasn't coming back, things were going to go south. The panic inside them would spark a more serious rebellion, and that's when the real hell would begin. 30 minutes before the power went out, the witch Li Huan was greedily wolfing down her noodles. The man, his current benefactor, was recently bragging about how he bought supplies at 50 times the market price. And those poor souls could do nothing but shut their mouths and sell off what they had. He spent only 500,000 for all the resources he stockpiled. He also started the custom of auctioning off supplies, turning the poor against each other just to scrap for a crumb. The blonde who used this tactic made quite a fortune. He ran his hand over Li Huan's face and asked if he'd made the right choice by following her. The witch smiled and nodded cheerfully. The rich snob was thinking of doing whatever he wanted with this beautiful girl, as long as he had the resources to buy her obedience. Their fun was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps filling the hallway. The ones coming were the parking lot crew, and they brought tools to break down the doors. She overheard them saying she was being targeted for leading the price hikes in the blonde group chat at midnight. The looters started forcing the door, punching and kicking it. The blonde might have been rich, but could all that money save her from the approaching disaster? He stood there helpless, not knowing what to do as people kept trying to push inside. In the end, Mr. Yung's crazy cult of starving soldiers had completely spiraled out of control. The blizzard continued to rage relentlessly, with no sign of letting up anytime soon. Back at Hanfeng's shelter, things had become complicated. The floors were filled with cables and materials. He was trying to set a Home Alone-style trap on the door. The place turned into a battlefield. Hanfeng had done everything to rig the door, but the power gauge showed there was no current at all. While he was wondering exactly where he went wrong, the tangled mess of cables he'd hurriedly tied together exploded and caught fire. The line must have come alive right at that moment. Caught in the explosion, Hanfeng coughed as he tried to regain consciousness. He put out the fire on the cable. He still couldn't figure out what he did wrong and what made this process so difficult. If the internet were working, this wouldn't be a problem. Unfortunately, before he could set that door trap, someone started knocking on his door. Hanfeng stood up and carefully looked through the peephole to see who was on the other side of the door. He couldn't see a face, but he saw a short person with spiky hair. She was that excluded girl again. This time when asking for help, he had that same indifferent look on his face again. It was terrible timing for Hanfeng, who was busy setting up makeshift traps inside. But then he remembered the event that sent him back to the past. That moment when he was seduced by a witch and thrashed by a maniac. He loosened his grip on the door handle. He was afraid of what might be lurking on the other side. Hanfeng warned the girl that people were breaking down doors and looting supplies. Instead of letting him in, she said she wouldn't open the door and that he should go home quickly. The outcast girl stood in that gloomy, cold hallway. A silence fell over the place. Then the girl started banging on the door harder and louder. When Hanfeng still refused to let her in, she chose to sit on the threshold and shiver. The cold was biting deep, and the looters' voices were getting louder and louder. When they reached Hanfeng's floor, they didn't care at all about how many people lived on the 18th floor. They came here just to break down every door in their way. Two scruffy-looking men scanned the 18th floor hallway, celebrating being the first to arrive. Without wasting any time, they divided the rooms to be looted among themselves. As luck would have it, Hanfeng's room was the closest. One of the raiders grabbed a crowbar to work on the door. They posed as relief workers to see if anyone was inside. Inside, Hanfeng had grabbed the girl and covered her mouth to keep her quiet. When the raiders received no response from inside, they tried to force their way in using their only crowbar. Hanfeng whispered to the outcast girl that those scumbags couldn't even scratch their fortified door. Hearing his reassuring words, the girl visibly calmed down. The door handle went up and down repeatedly, but the intruders found no way in. When that solid door blocked them, the men marked Hanfeng's apartment and decided to move to the next one for now. Luckily, that reinforced door and handle were mounted with 5 centimeters thick iron plates that strengthened the safe. Even the master who installed this was shocked. Hanfeng was so pleased with his decisions that he completely forgot to let go of the girl's mouth. He was terrified of making noise and drawing attention. Still, the outcast girl thanked her for bringing her inside before those raiders saw her sitting out there. They chose to wait a few more minutes to be sure, but it seemed those raiders were gone. Hanfeng immediately went back to fixing the trap. If he could do this right, anyone who dared touch his door again would be fried by an electric shock. The girl curiously asked what he was doing, and he introduced it as an electric defense measure. He even told her she wouldn't understand even if he explained it to her condescendingly. Actually, he didn't even fully understand what the tool did, and setting up this electric device seemed impossible. But he had no idea the girl was an expert in anti-theft devices and voltage differences. This is child's play for her. While carefully wrapping the bare wire around the handle, they connected the other cable from the circuit box to the knob. And they turned on the power for the grand finale. When measuring the live current in the arm, the tester showed a high level of electricity. When asked how she knew about these complex gadgets, she said the evil king's eye of truth has the power to see the reality behind everything in the world. Since the trap was handled with the outcast girl's help, he asked her what she needed help with. The girl isn't really into telling stories like that. They didn't even bother. Ignoring Hanfeng, she dumped the contents of her backpack onto the sofa. Then the girl bravely declared that the evil king's eye of truth would dwell in this place from now on. It took Hanfeng a second to process what he heard. He was clearly against the girl living in her own space and desperately pressured her to return home immediately. Hanfeng was so stunned by this idea that he tripped over the tangled cables on the floor and lunged forward. After wobbling for a few seconds, it slammed onto the hard floor and caused a total mess. They had a bright purple color in their hands, emitting a strange energy. Tripping and falling should have really hurt, but it didn't. That's when he realized where he'd landed. Just a second ago, his rock-solid stand had turned into something as moldable as Play-Doh. Could it be that she accidentally softened the coffee table? Hanfeng finally noticed the purple light dancing in their hands and immediately linked it to the table's strange softness. Even the nearby toolbox and tools had warped and lost their shape upon contact with the light. He grabbed a hammer, and the metal had bent back on itself. It started to lose its shape as Hanfeng swung the hammer. To put it simply, purple light could cause objects to soften. Somehow the outcast girl witnessed this strange event with her own eyes and didn't make a sound. It was so quiet that Hanfeng forgot someone else was in the room and got too absorbed in figuring out his new talent. The outcast girl just looked at him with those blank stares. Then his face lit up, and he labeled him an envoy chosen by the evil king's eye of truth. Whatever this means, Hanfeng chose to enter the game by posing as an underling chosen by the evil king, rather than revealing his power. This girl's mindset seemed a bit crazy. So he could handle the situation. He suggested that as fellow envoys they should help each other, which meant they had to share Hanfeng's apartment. He was about to reject her again when the outcast girl headed toward one of the rooms as if she owned the place. She hadn't even accepted the offer yet. But that lady thought they'd already built a sanctuary for her evil king. It wasn't a big deal, so he let it go. Now, what's more important was to figure out exactly what that purple light was. With a rough glance, it seemed to have the ability to soften objects. This meant he had more than just two types of light at his disposal. Maybe there were many more powers he had yet to discover. The spark that started it all was when he tripped over the cables and nearly hit that coffee table that turned into mush. It made sense to try and recapture that feeling to bring that power out again. Staring at that image for a while, Hanfeng managed to summon the purple lights again. He was finally getting the hang of summoning his powers automatically. The first thing he tried were those cables that triggered this discovery in the first place. Then she turned to other things, especially a sharp kitchen knife. With curiosity, he activated the purple light. And it quickly swallowed that dirty blade whole. He was shocked to see the softening effect work seamlessly even on steel. It had softened so much that the once sharp blade felt like jelly wrapping around his skin. After that, he lost control. And he tried this softening touch on many other materials. Every household item you can think of was vulnerable to this power. The longer they used the purple light, the softer they became. No other changes were happening, aside from changing an object's softness. On its own, the effect of the purple light was quite unnecessary and useless. Then, a light bulb went off in Hanfeng's head. It's a concept he already knows. What if they combined two different types of light? What would happen if you mixed purple and green and applied them to a softened object at the same time? It didn't take long to master blending the two lights into one. He grabbed that kitchen knife that looked all melted and warped. He shined both purple and green light on it. And as if it sprang from his consciousness, he shouted, "Bankai!" It's hard to believe, but it actually worked. That melted, dough-like kitchen knife has turned back into a solid state. It was as hard and sharp as before. Wow, the bastard was shining so bright he could have used the knife as a mirror. After applying the unified lights, he scanned the room and found a tissue box sitting there. Curious, Hanfeng applied the same process to a paper napkin and tried to bend it to change its shape. It was quite hard for him to do this. This meant he could change the hardness of an object. Of course, when two different lights combine. Plus, the durability those green and purple lights gave these objects was pretty extreme. Speaking of durability, wasn't there a very important and practical use for this ability? Meanwhile, property owners looting others' supplies had begun to grow selfish. They refused to return the stolen resources, choosing to keep them for themselves out of fear they would run out. They argued they didn't want to share the loot collected in Zoram with women and the elderly, but they had to keep it secret. If it got out, they'd be screwed. While the looters were planning their shameful crimes, one of them noticed something strange happening on the walls. They couldn't believe their eyes. The wall on the 18th floor seemed to be wriggling. When they shined a light on the surface, a face began to emerge from that solid concrete wall. It moved as if trying to claw out of the wall, face contorted in a grimace. Raiders might be hardened criminals when stealing resources, but this was inexplicable and downright horrific. With arms added to the face, it looked like a ghost trying to cross into the mortal world. And that was the moment it all fell apart. Anyone watching would have thought they were witnessing a real-life paranormal event. Terrified of what the pillagers on the 18th floor might do to them, they scrambled downstairs. Meanwhile, Hanfeng was struggling, because breathing is quite a task while stretching soft walls with your face. He had to get out of that soft, Play-Doh-like mess before his oxygen ran out. For the sake of the experiment, he chose one of his walls as a test site for the combined powers of purple and green light. But putting these lights on a huge wall was exhausting. After a while, she managed to combine and fuse a massive amount of light. It was an extremely grueling process, but it gave him a much stronger and more durable wall than before. He took out a sledgehammer to test it and double-check. He stood before the reinforced wall and raised the sledgehammer into the air. He was determined to check whether he succeeded or not. With an expectant look, he set to work. Hanfeng swung the sledgehammer with all his might, and the tools slammed hard against the wall. He did it over and over, hitting it so many times that he could no longer hold that heavy sledgehammer properly. Still, it was worth the exhaustion because the reinforced wall proved to be extremely solid. Despite all his strength, he hadn't even scratched the surface. Back in the basement parking lot, most of the looters had returned and were dropping off several bags of their loot. A man was scratching his head, apologizing for only being able to get a little bit of food. He was on edge during the check, and his nerves peaked when someone touched his shoulder. The man who touched his shoulder pinned him down and quickly tied his arms behind his back. This concerned citizen was one of the Jin brothers. He pressed him hard, asking where the rest of the stolen food was hidden. The looter denied hiding supplies, but Brother Jean clearly saw him carrying 3 large bags before handing over just one small bag. Even with his arms twisted in pain, he fiercely denied hiding any resources. It looks like he had no intention of talking with a little arm twisting. Maybe a good beating would make the man honest. Tam was just about to strike this crooked looter when a calm hand on his shoulder stopped him. The one who surprised everyone was the man of the people, Bai Jiang. Bai Jiang asked the young man to release the looter first. That way, if there was a real problem, they could talk it out. He had heard the rumor about food being hidden away. But this food was supposed to be for everyone. And she wanted to solve the matter her way. Brother Jean finally softened and threw that dirtbag to the ground. For Bai Jiang's sake. When the scavenger looked up, he saw a helpful hand reaching out to him. This hand belonged to the representative of the Bodrum parking lot, that philanthropist, Bai Jiang. Her smile gave people peace and tranquility, but behind that gentle face, something sinister always lurked. After a few minutes of talking and persuading, the man finally brought out the rest of the food he'd looted. Just as said, there were 2 more big bags not in the records. The man apologized in shame for his greed. He had 5 mouths to feed at home, and the distributed food wasn't enough. Hearing this, Bai Jiang took his daily rations and gave them to the man without hesitation. He respected the rules. People had to hand over what they collected to get supplies. Distribution was based on household size. But he could understand those who struggled to live like that and felt they were right. This kind gesture almost brought the fake looter to tears right then and there. While thanking Bai Jiang wholeheartedly, the lying thief Lao Wang swore he would be at Bai Jiang's service if he ever needed anything in the future. Turning to the crowd lined up, Master Jiang urged them to quickly take their rations and head home. The Jiang brothers wondered how Master Jiang could willingly give that thief everything, plus extra supplies from his own share. Jiang kept saying he didn't do much, he just explained a certain principle to the man. Of course, the Jiang brothers were dying to hear this principle. Lord Jiang started telling the story. Revolts and uprisings broke out many times in the country's history as the interests of different social classes clashed. But the nature of these riots was defined as a social movement. If you didn't get caught at the scene, you wouldn't be convicted in court. All Master Jiang did was tell him the community wouldn't house him if he broke the rules. Then he'd be no different from an ordinary thief. I'm not even counting the legal penalty. Once the disaster passed, that guy would also have to face the vengeance of the people whose mana he stole. With all these fears piling up, the decision became easier, of course. Uncle Lu watched everything from a distance like a silent observer. He knew that Mr. Jiang had skipped something on purpose. There was always a leader within those rebel groups who directed the community's actions. In hard times, both heroes and traitors always emerged. And he could see that potential in this Jiang kid. Back to our main man, he was still busy smashing his house left and right with a sledgehammer. He wanted to make sure they were nearly indestructible. This work had exhausted him, but at least he had break-resistant glass now. Now that he reinforced the whole house and finished the structural testing, he could finally relax. Just then, someone started pounding on his door again. This was starting to happen quite often. He stepped slowly and silently across the floor. And he wondered if it was those resource-stealing neighbors again. When he reached the entrance, he looked through the peephole to see what was happening. And what should he see? The person shivering in the cold, crying out his name with tears in her eyes, was none other than Li Hannah. This scene felt way too familiar. The girl kept on about how she couldn't betray Hanfeng's feelings for her. One can only truly know a person's heart in difficult times. Someone who truly loves her would invest in her unconditionally, and blah blah blah. If he just opens the door, she'll gladly open her heart too. The night Hanfeng died replayed in his mind. He was ambushed in his own room, remember? He remembered how this witch and her partner made a fool out of him. Today, this girl was repeating the exact same words she said before she died. That means there's a guy waiting behind the door to crush his head if he falls for this trick. Seeing that he could finally take his revenge, Hanfeng's first thought was to grab his gun and kill this low-life dog right then and there. But it stopped halfway. Since the power is out, the enemy hiding in the dark would have the advantage while he's an open target. If Hanfeng couldn't finish it in one shot, he could lose his own life. If he used electric shocks, it would be almost impossible to convince two people to touch the trap at the same time. For now, he did his best to calm down while shutting off the generators. He had only one shot at this, and that was reason enough not to lose his focus. He needed to analyze the situation calmly. The real threat wasn't the witch at the door, but the man hiding in the dark. Hanfeng had to pinpoint his location and strike the fatal blow as soon as he stepped out. But that first part could have been a bit tricky. Luckily, he knew how this had happened in the past. As far as he remembered, that guy should be hiding in the blind spot behind the door. He pinpointed the killer's likely position from behind the wall. While gripping the sledgehammer tightly, an idea came to Hanfeng's mind. It would take some time to act it out, but this was his best shot. He put his hand on the surface of the wall. Purple lights gathered in his hands as he hoped the plan would work. Meanwhile, Li Hannah keeps playing the damsel in distress. Desperate to be saved, she cried out Hanfeng's name. The man Hanfeng brought to strip and kill him was already starting to have second thoughts. But the girl insisted this loser Hanfeng had tons of resources, saying he brought in truckloads of supplies the day before the disaster. Anyone would jump at the chance to loot enough resources to feed themselves for days. But they made a big mistake by choosing the wrong superpower target. The wall behind the killer shifted and moved like Play-Doh. A sledgehammer-shaped bulge appeared, as if trying to punch through a soft wall. The killer had begun hearing strange noises nearby, but Li Hannah was so focused on her scheme that she didn't notice. By the time the killer realized the sound came from behind, it was too late to turn around. A massive sledgehammer coated in softened concrete slammed into the guy's jaw with such devastating force that it undoubtedly shattered his face. The witch recoiled in shock as she saw her accomplice flying like a ragdoll. He asked what happened, but was the man even in any state to speak? His body was trembling with pain and cold. Just then, the door said to be stuck creaked and slowly cracked open. Hanfeng burst out of his room with a fire extinguisher in hand and a devious smirk on his face. The witch in ruins looked in terror at the man she thought was a loser. Before he could even open his mouth to say a word, Hanfeng blasted the fire extinguisher. As the witch screamed in pain, she covered herself all over with that white substance. Li Hannah was a good player, and hello. Hanfeng managed to keep that delicate tone of voice while begging him to stop squeezing that white substance. He even swallowed some, which is something you should normally never do. The witch coughed and coughed as her body began to fail from the cold of the extinguishing agent. When he opened his eyes, he saw that rich blonde snob he'd brought along as the muscle for the heist. Hanfeng is lying on the ground. He was shaking uncontrollably and desperately calling for help. But unfortunately, Li Hyona wasn't in a position to help, either. Hanfeng's hand reached through the fire extinguisher smoke for the witch. The woman reacted quickly, but Hanfeng managed to grab both her hair and her scarf at the same time. It must be the adrenaline coursing through his veins that helped Li Hyona escape. Though he lost a handful of hair in the process, he slipped away just like a snake. She managed to stand up and escape, screaming for help. The witch fled so quickly that Hanfeng clicked his tongue. The same couldn't be said for the man he hit with a sledgehammer. Overflowing with rage and frustration, the guy could barely even stand. Hanfeng kicked the rich brat in the stomach, just as he was about to crush the man who killed him in his past life. The blonde snob begged to wait for a second. That idiot started talking nonsense and bringing up his father's name. He was swearing that if Hanfeng touched her again, bad things would happen to him. Hanfeng answered by landing a solid punch right on his face. At the same time, he was inciting the spoiled brat about what to do next. Hanfeng didn't even care who this guy's father was. His intention was to cause as much pain as possible and beat this kid black and blue to his heart's content. Seeing that threats didn't work, Blondie tried a more respectful approach. He addressed Hanfeng as his brother. He claimed they didn't even have a feud, and so the beating was completely unjustified. Driven mad by memories of his past life, Hanfeng slammed that scumbag's head into the ground with another punch. He sat on his chest and kept raining down blows one after another. By throwing up everything inside. This man had treated her life as if it were worthless. He was killed just minding his own business. With blood-stained gloves and eyes full of hatred, Hanfeng forced the fop to speak. Maybe Blondie wanted to say something, but his jaw and mouth were so shattered he couldn't utter a single word. Hanfeng stood up and picked up the modified baseball bat lying on the floor. Holding the gun that ended his life and started a new one, he looked at the criminal lying helpless on the ground. Rich brat is crying, coughing up blood. And she was asking why she was being treated this way. Hanfeng lost it, the man who killed him for no reason at all. Now he was daring to expect a reason from him. He raised the steel club studded with nails and brought it down on Blondie's face with all his might. The sound of a skull cracking and blood splattering filled the corridor of the 18th floor. He finally had his revenge. He killed the man who killed him. Hanfeng's blood was boiling. His adrenaline had run out, and he stared at the horrific scene before him. When he realized the weight of what he'd done, he almost gagged at the bloody mess. Fortunately, he managed to turn his head and vomit on the floor. Hanfeng was doing his best to regain his senses when a familiar voice cleared its throat. He turned around and saw the outcast girl sitting by the door, silently playing with the man's blood. Clearly she'd seen everything. She offered to help him clean up the mess. They cleared the scene quickly. The girl wasn't even affected by the blood and gore. Hanfeng thought there was something strange about this girl. It wasn't a good idea at all to let him stay home. To convince him to go home, she made up an excuse that he could be targeted by vengeful criminals at any moment. That way, he'd avoid being caught in the crossfire. But as the girl sipped her orange juice, she didn't seem to care at all about the threat of more intruders. Hanfeng actually wanted her to leave for her own good, but she was determined to stay in the apartment. And by the looks of it, nothing was going to stop him. He emphasized that the coming days would be dangerous, and that both of them could die in the process. The girl set her orange juice glass on the table with determination. It's like they're taking a stand. The outcast girl assured them that the evil king's true eye would protect them no matter what. But for now, the evil king's power was spent, and he needed to sleep. Hanfeng had no more patience for these theatrics. So he grabbed the girl's arm before she could lock herself in the room. And she wanted him to stop brushing her off with this so-called cool nonsense, and just listen. Because they would be facing a very serious situation. The girl just glanced at the tight grip on her shoulder. Then he looked up. He told her to go and open the room door. Confused, Hanfeng chose to follow her lead and peeked inside the door. I don't know what he saw, but he's shaken to the core. Hanfeng was speechless. By the way, the basement parking lot was busy. Some guys were wandering aimlessly, blocking the path of those who hadn't gotten their supplies yet. Once again, the system worked. They still didn't have enough supplies for everyone, but for now, the situation seemed mostly calm. Li Hyona had just escaped from Hanfeng's hands, and he queued up with the miserable crowds to get his share. With nowhere else to go and no one to take her in, she gave her name and apartment number and was handed a piece of bread. This which was still resentful that things had come to this point. The night before, her wealthy sponsor suddenly collapsed and vanished. The only logical explanation was that Hanfeng had set a trap in advance. But this only fueled his curiosity about what was hidden behind that door. Before the chaos broke, he saw a light leak from within and felt a warm breeze on his face. This meant there was a power source inside. Maybe he wasn't just stocking up on supplies. Maybe he was prepared for all this blizzard in advance. The only feeling gnawing at him was anger. That sneaky bastard hadn't said a single word to him about the approaching disaster. While he was enjoying himself, Hyona had to settle for his scraps. Hanfeng had to find a way to take a closer look at the inline. Lost in his own fantasies and fuming, he bumped into another man waiting in the supply line. The man recognized her and shone the bright flashlight directly into Li Hyona's face. The man with the flashlight cheerfully invited Li Hyona to the Block 5 lobby. The survivors there lit a grill to keep warm. Hyona wasn't interested at all. She insisted on refusing, saying she'd get warm at home. But the guy was being too clingy. He bragged about how much food he'd have if it were shared at his house. He claimed he had enough supplies to last 2 people for a few days. This prick always liked girls who were her type. So he saw this moment as an opportunity to score. Li Hyona could be an unbearable witch, but even she shuddered with disgust at this punk's offer. Seeing his attempts to lure them with supplies failed, the creep started causing trouble. He accused him of claiming fake rations for other households, which was true. Hearing the noise, the other survivors began to pay attention. Li Hyona pushed the creep out of her way and threw the food he got through fraud right in his face. Publicly humiliated, the pervert raised his hand and tried to hit the woman's head with his flashlight. Nurse Jean stepped in before I could attack that witch. She slapped the creep so hard the lowlife flew back and hit the nearby wall. Seeing things get serious, the others decided to call their great leader Ba Jiang to resolve the matter. Li Hyona was frozen in the face of the nurse's power. The angel-faced nurse gave him a business card and invited him for an exam, just in case he was injured or felt unwell. Not wanting to draw more attention, Nurse Hyona thanked Jean and tried to slip away as quickly as possible. But the creep was persistent. He stood up and attacked Nurse Jean, pinning her down and shouting, "Dirty bitch," at probably the kindest person in the building. Just as he was about to beat the woman, someone grabbed the creep and yanked him off the nurse with a forceful move. With one single move, our favorite gangster Li neutralized the rabid freak. His lips were cracked, and he might have been starving, but Li couldn't stand men who laid a hand on women. Mr. Zhang finally arrived at the scene. The creep immediately pointed at Hyona, snitching that she made fake resource requests and hung out with rich kids to inflate supply prices. Seeing that the scumbag still hadn't learned his lesson, Brother Li lunged at him again. But before he could reach that creep, Mr. Zhang grabbed the snitch by the collar and started lecturing him about the committee's purpose. They were supposed to protect the weak and ensure everyone had food to eat. In the end, the creep only got a stern warning for his crime. Mr. Bei approached Nurse Jean and Li, apologized, and invited them both to the committee. Li said no to the brother. He wasn't interested in robbing others under the name of a committee. He'd rather starve to death than compromise his principles. Similarly, Nurse Jean also declined the offer in a more polite manner. He couldn't accept the committee's bullying methods but was happy to help the patients. As the two left the parking lot, Hyona cut in and asked Mr. Zhang if she could join the group. The witch clung to Mr. Zhang's arm. No matter how pathetic it seemed, she was trying to land someone powerful using her fading feminine charm. Mr. Zhang, a total Sigma, made the situation clear. They only accepted people with valuable skills. Li was a fighter, and Nurse Jean could heal patients. A bitch like Li Hyona would be useless in the apocalypse. In its current state, it had no value worthy of committee consideration. The witch pushed her mind and insisted she knew a place with plenty of resources. Meanwhile, Sounds were coming from Hanfeng's room, as if he were playing a guessing game with his new roommate. As the outcast girl pulled item after item from the hole, a kind of black hole began to form between her hands. Hanfeng swore he was trying to describe something he needed, but she kept pulling out mannequins. To explain what happened, the outcast girl admitted she has dimensional storage abilities. He could open a black hole that sucked in everything around it. Getting things in was easy, but getting them back out wasn't so simple. The accuracy rate for finding the items was very low. Hanfeng wondered about the black hole's interior and how this ability worked. The outcast girl had never explored her inside before since she had no trouble mixing things by hand. Hanfeng thought he could take a look inside and stuck his head into the girl's black hole. "Don't call the police right away, it's not what you think." With half his body in subspace, he opened his eyes to a massive dimension filled with endless supplies. The size was incredibly large. Materials and random junk were floating in chaos. That's exactly what you'd expect from the superhuman who cleared out the eastern supermarkets overnight. Suddenly, Hanfeng noticed something and his eyes began to well up. There was no oxygen in the area inside the black hole. He quickly pulled his head back from the airless subspace, gasping for breath like crazy. Even those few seconds spent inside that cursed subspace were enough to cause trauma. Told to the outcast girl. He hadn't even warned her that there was no air inside. He felt as if all the moisture had been sucked out of his body, leaving him dry. Ignoring his complaints, the girl kept rummaging through her endless storage space. And finally, he found what they were looking for. Turns out Hanfeng was looking for remote-controlled toys. Drone boxes and remote-controlled cars poured out of the black hole. Hanfeng was so hyped up he immediately forgot the near-death experience he just had. On the cold, icy stairs of the 18th floor, some looters are trying their luck, attempting to rob a few poor souls. This floor is now notorious. There are rumors of a monster roaming the hallways. The looter with glasses doesn't believe in such supernatural rumors. Even Mr. Zhang personally sent them for these rigorous investigations. They don't have the luxury of letting their bosses down. Some people doubt the info they got from that girl Li Hyona. Still, a worker should just work and focus on their bread. The raiders were unaware, but Hanfeng and his new toys were watching them. Luckily, they managed to activate the monitoring system just in time to greet the uninvited guests. They had prepared a brilliant plan to handle these kinds of situations. Hanfeng will light the fire, and the second plan will begin. He set his timer for 2 minutes, left the room, and headed for the stairs. The looters froze in their tracks when they heard that thin, eerie voice from afar. Right after the sound, the place suddenly turned into a riot of lights. The source of these lights was none other than the remote-controlled cars Hanfeng had prepared in advance. The looters took a deep breath when they saw the toys. But what they didn't see were the explosives attached to those toys. When the fuse ended, the stairs shook with small explosions, trapping the looters in the smoke. Don't worry, it's not lethal. They were just lime explosives designed to blind intruders. While they were stunned, a drone flew over their heads. When they saw another explosive on the drone's tail, the looters scattered like chicks and scrambled back into the hole they came from. They tried to escape the flying drone, but our outlier girl is a master pilot. There's no escape. Hanfeng insisted that these bastards needed to be taught a real lesson this time. But in his eagerness to mess with the scavengers, he flew the drone too close and too low, leaving it vulnerable to attack. While trying to dodge the looter's crowbar, one of the drone's propellers took a hit. Once the left control of the drone went out, it became impossible to balance. Since it was their only aircraft, they couldn't afford to lose it. The outcast girl tried to regain control, but the spinning toy flew out the window. The timer Hanfeng set finally hit 0, and the fireworks on their single drone exploded like a North Pole New Year's celebration outside. This explosion also caused the right propeller to fail, and finally they lost complete control. The outcast girl tried to make a difficult emergency landing in front of a specific window to save the day. Dressed in hanfu, she got ready to head out and get her toys. That drone is very important for them right now, but the aerial camera caught something strange. Between the stairs, there was a dark shape that looked like a corpse. When zoomed in, it was clear that this so-called corpse bore a striking resemblance to his brother. Hanfeng wondered what a gangster was doing on the freezing stairs. Maybe he was robbed too. Right now, there are 2 reasons to go out. Hanfeng warned his roommate not to open the door for anyone. He took a few basic supplies with him, just in case. He gave the outcast girl a walkie-talkie to stay in touch with her. For the final touch, he grabbed the Hanfeng pistol, chambered around, and hoped he wouldn't have to use it outside. With a flashlight in hand, Hanfeng began to step cautiously down the stairs. With the lead raiders retreating, floors 17, 16, and 15 were safe for now. According to the drone's readings, the outside temperature had already dropped to minus 49.8 degrees. Without protective measures, a human would freeze to death in minutes or even seconds. The Brotherhood hung by a thread, and if Hanfeng wanted to save his buddy, he had to act fast. Meanwhile, the team was describing what happened to them on the upper floors. Baizhang listened calmly and thanked them for their efforts. In exchange for all the hardships they endured, the only things they received were 3 pieces of thick clothing and a pack of noodles each. Given how scarce resources have become, these noodle packs are now priceless. It was an award given only to those who contributed to the cause. Li Hyona, looking all disheveled, asked Baizhang if she could join the group now. Zhang rejected her again coldly. Right now, they aren't even sure if this attack was Hanfeng's doing. Besides, if Uncle Li hadn't personally seen someone hauling supplies before the disaster, Baizhang wouldn't have even listened to that woman. For now, they need to regroup and secure that floor with superior numbers. Whether the information Li Hyona gave is right or wrong will be determined in this operation. This is a chance for the woman to prove her worth. Grabbing an iron pipe and gripping it like a weapon with both hands, the woman is determined to do whatever it takes to get inside. Before heading up, Baizhang reminded everyone again that they are the community's vital workforce and must stay safe. The big boss is at the front. A large group of raiders gathered and poured onto the stairs. Halfway up the climb, they spotted Brother Li, unconscious and nearly frozen. Baizhang took out a thermos of hot water and gave Li a drink. The man woke up with his tongue burning. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked at the circling pack of looters with disgust. When he saw that his rescuers were these scumbags, he cursed his luck and clicked his tongue. Baizhang's sycophant jumped in and told him to thank Baizhang for saving his life. Brother Li responded to this with only a sarcastic laugh. The gangster refuses to bow to the community's will. He was calling them out for acting like heroes when they were just thieves. He cursed at the lackey and tried to beat him, but Baizhang held him back. That always grinning big boss once again offered to join forces with Li. And just like before, Li flatly rejected the offer. The looters were getting fed up with his stubbornness and audacity. Even if he's been saved, Brother Li hates being told what to do. He turned back and tried to climb the stairs, but Baizhang grabbed him firmly by the shoulders. That sneaky guy, grinning from ear to ear, asked if there had been some misunderstanding. He claimed that only the weak want to join forces to increase their chances of survival. But Brother Li, that scumbag Yang can see right through his fake smile. The committee, supposedly dedicated to protecting the weak, gave the elderly only 1 meal every 3 days. In this case, it was officially a death warrant. Besides, Brother Li has no other relatives nearby. So your tactics to guilt-trip him into joining won't work. On the stairs to the next floor, Hanfeng silently watched and listened to their conversation. What she just heard confirmed that Zhang Shui didn't actually care about anyone. It finally made sense why they wanted to recruit the young while leaving the elderly, sick, weak, and disabled to slowly rot away. If this keeps up, conflicts will eventually break out within the committee. The sycophant gangster, tired of Brother Li's rudeness, stepped in to bark at his face. That lapdog, who didn't appreciate their kindness, made the mistake of his life by entering Brother Li's attack range. That cold-blooded gangster with a heart of gold headbutted the lapdog with all his might. Even though Brother Li was shaking all over in pain after that headbutt, he still kept his cool and held his ground. Just one look from a man with nothing to lose was enough to make those armed looters instinctively back away. Bai Jian weighed the situation as his men watched him silently, waiting for the next order. The armed looters gradually shook off their fear and slowly began to surround Lin. While shaking and trembling, barely able to stand, he challenged these thieving bastards, shouting, "Come on! Watching from a floor above, Hanfeng noticed his brother was on the verge of collapsing and needed help. No matter how much he wanted to help, there were too many looters below. If he intervened, he could have been lost in that crowd. But Li had backed him up many times before. Hanfeng couldn't just watch his benefactor throw his life away in a miserable last stand. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration hit the young man. He pulled out his gun and pointed it down. He watched the commotion below with composure. He was waiting with the weapon in hand, finger on the trigger. No one had even dared to strike him. But Li was swaying, as if he were about to collapse again. Hanfeng finally got tired of the looters swarming his man, and fired a warning shot. The bullet almost grazed Mr. Jiang's mutt's junk. That deafening gunshot shattered everyone's confidence. They couldn't believe someone in the building had a firearm. Hanfeng slowly descended the stairs with his weapon raised, ordering everyone not to move. It was quite effective in repelling the raiders. Looking around anxiously, Brother Li saw the familiar gun and immediately recognized his little brother. While the looters were wetting themselves in fear, Mr. Jiang remained strangely calm in the crowd. Li Haona's eyes widened when she saw Hanfeng approaching with a gun. Hanfeng carefully handed Li the key to the dressing room. And they slowly retreated, eyes fixed on the invaders. The sycophants were looking to their big bosses for the next move.